What if the most famous sermon ever preached was also the most misunderstood? Millions of people have heard it, quoted it, hung pieces of it on their walls. They've memorized the lines about turning the other cheek, about the lilies of the field, about the meek inheriting the earth. And yet, most of them have missed what Jesus was actually doing up there. A hillside in Galilee, a crowd gathering, and not the crowd you would expect. Yes, the faithful were there, but so were the desperate, the parents lying awake over children they couldn't feed, the fishermen one bad season away from losing everything, the young men whose hands itched for a sword against Rome, the ones who had given up on the religious establishment years ago and didn't know they were still hungry for God. And in the middle of them, a carpenter sat down. What he said next was more than a sermon. It reshaped how people understood blessing, justice, prayer, and forgiveness, and it continues to do so to this day. But one of the most important things about the sermon is not only what Jesus said, it is the order in which he said it. Keep watching, and I'll explain what Jesus actually meant up there, line by line, the way the first crowd heard it, and why the kingdom of God begins where you would never think to look. The crowd on that hillside did not arrive empty. They carried a lifetime of voices with them, loud ones, confident ones, voices that told them exactly what a blessed life looked like, what God wanted, and how the world really worked. There were the Pharisees, the keepers of the law, the men in fine robes who measured righteousness in inches and centimeters, how far you walked on the Sabbath, how carefully you washed your hands, how visibly you fasted. Religion as performance, holiness as boundary. If you wanted to know whether God was pleased with you, you looked at the list, and you checked the boxes. Many of the people on that hillside had spent their whole lives failing those checklists, and feeling like God was disappointed in them every single day. Then there were the zealots, the radicals, the ones who whispered in back rooms and sharpened blades in secret. Their gospel was simple. They had given up on prayer and piety. The kingdom would come through fire, through revolt, through Roman blood spilled in the streets of Jerusalem. They were tired of waiting on God to act, so they would act for him. And then there was Rome itself, the empire that owned the roads, the temple tax, the soldiers on every corner. Rome had its own gospel, and it was the oldest one in the world. Power is the only truth. Strength is the only virtue. The strong eat, the weak serve. The only kingdom is the one held at the point of a spear. Three voices, three completely different visions of what a blessed life looks like. And if you listen carefully, you can still hear all three of them today. The Pharisee lives on in every culture of religious performance, where what people think of your faith matters more than what your faith is actually doing inside you. The zealot lives on in every movement that believes God's purposes will be accomplished by force, by anger, by tearing the right people down. And Rome. Rome is still the loudest voice of all. Get more, climb higher, win, the strong eat. Those were the voices ringing in the ears of the crowd on that hillside. And then the carpenter sat down. In the rabbinic world, a teacher stood to read the scriptures and sat down to teach. When Jesus took his seat, the crowd knew he was about to speak with authority. His words would be heard, remembered, and obeyed. He looked at the desperate, the furious, the exhausted. He let the silence do its work. And then he opened his mouth. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The first words out of his mouth were a blessing, spoken over people the world had taught to see themselves as forgotten. Most people read the Beatitudes like a buffet. 8 blessings, 8 different categories of people. Take the one that fits your situation and leave the rest for someone else. But read them straight through, slowly, and they begin to form something larger. They sound less like 8 separate statements about 8 different kinds of people, and more like a single portrait, one face, one kind of life, traced from the inside out. Read together. The Beatitudes show us the shape of a person being formed by the kingdom, and Jesus invited the whole crowd into that life. And he began where every life with God must begin. Poor in spirit is easy to misread. It sounds like self-deprecation, like walking around announcing how broken you are. But Jesus was pointing to something far deeper, the radical honesty of a person who has finally stopped pretending before God. You stop trying to look like you have it all together. You drop the performance, the carefully managed image of how spiritual you are. What remains is the truth, that you cannot save yourself, that you need Him. That kind of honesty is the doorway, and everything else in the sermon walks through it. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. This is more than grief over loss. It is grief that sees clearly, mourning over what sin has done to you, to the people you love, to the world. The person who mourns this way is wide awake. They have stopped numbing themselves to the wrongness of things, and they are willing to feel it. And Jesus says, those are the ones God personally comforts. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Meekness gets mistaken for weakness, but it is the opposite. Meekness is strength surrendered to God. Picture a war horse that has been trained, massive strength under absolute control, power that does not move until it is directed. A soldier whose hand never goes to his sword unless his commander says so. That is meekness. The strongest person in the room is the one who does not need to prove it. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Most readings of the Beatitudes go shallow right here. Righteousness in the Bible is bigger than personal holiness. It is also justice, the setting right of what is wrong. When Jesus says, hunger for righteousness, He means more than wanting to be a good person. He means people who ache for the world itself to be made right, who cannot stand the gap between what is and what should be, and He calls them blessed. Their hunger is a sign of life. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. From here, the portrait turns outward. The first 4 Beatitudes describe an inner posture, the soul before God. The next 3 describe what flows out of it. You cannot be genuinely poor in spirit and remain unmerciful to other people. You cannot truly mourn what is wrong and still tolerate division in your own relationships. The inside always shapes the outside. The Beatitudes work less like a list and more like a chain, each link pulling the next. And then the final one, the seal on the portrait. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Jesus closes the portrait honestly. If you actually live this way, humble, mourning, meek, hungering for justice, merciful, pure, peacemaking, the world will push back on you. It pushes back precisely because you are doing something true in a world that has organized itself around something else. Persecution, he says, may be the very evidence that you are still on the road. 8 statements, 1 face. On that hillside, Jesus painted one kind of life, and then He called you to step into it. The crowd was still absorbing the Beatitudes when Jesus looked at them, the desperate, the tired, the unimportant, and said words they could hardly believe were meant for them. You are the salt of the earth. Then He gave them a second image. You are the light of the world. You are, already, now. To this crowd of fishermen and farmers and broken souls who had just been told they were blessed in their poverty of spirit, the Beatitudes told them who they were before God. Salt and light showed them what they were called to do. Jesus was turning blessing into purpose. Salt, in the ancient world, did far more than season food. One of its most important functions was preservation. In a world without refrigeration, salt was what stood between a fish caught at sunrise and rotted meat by sunset. Salt preserved. It held back the decay that was always silently taking over. So when Jesus called his followers the salt of the earth, his image carried several layers, and preservation was one of the sharpest. Is your presence preserving anything? Is your home more patient because you are there? Are your children learning mercy because they have watched you practice it when you were tired? Is there a room at work where gossip dies because you refuse to feed it? Is there a friendship that has not rotted into bitterness because you chose to forgive before the apology came? That is one thing salt does. It does not announce itself. It simply enters what would decay and quietly holds it back. And that is one of the questions salt places before every follower of Jesus. Is anything around you less corrupted because you are present in it? Then he turned to light. And of all the images of light he could have chosen, he reached for the humblest one, a lamp, a small, steady, household flame. The kind of light you set on a stand in a single room so the people inside can stop stumbling over the furniture. Jesus is asking for steadiness, a presence reliable enough that the people around you can find their way by it. Then he pushed the picture one step further. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. He named the temptation directly because the temptation is real. Most of us, when we sense the cost of being visible, instinctively reach for the bowl. We go quiet when our conscience is telling us to speak. We laugh along when something in us knows better. We keep our convictions off the table because we do not want to make the room uncomfortable. We tell ourselves we are being wise, when sometimes it is only fear wearing a better name. Jesus saw that, and he answered it with one of the simplest commands in the entire sermon: let your light shine. Not so people will look at you, so they will look up, so they will see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. The order matters. Before Jesus tells his followers how to live, before the long passages about anger and lust and prayer and worry and judgment, he stops and tells them what they already are: salt, light. It was already true of them. Their only job was to live like it. And now, having named them, he is finally ready to show them what that kind of life looks like when it walks out into the real world. Right after the salt and the light, Jesus turned to the law itself. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. You can almost feel the crowd stiffen. These people had spent their entire lives under the law. Some of them carried it as a comfort. Some carried it as a burden so heavy they had stopped trying. And here was this carpenter from Nazareth. No rabbinic credentials, no standing in the temple, telling them what he had come to do with the most sacred inheritance of their nation: to fulfill, to bring something to its full intended meaning, to complete what had always been pointing forward. He had come to carry the law to the destination it had been reaching toward all along, and to reveal what it was truly for. Again and again, he used a formula no teacher had dared to use. You have heard that it was said, but I tell you. He took commands the crowd had heard since childhood, and he pulled the surface back to show what was underneath. He started with murder. You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, you shall not murder. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. The crowd did not flinch at the first half. Most of them had never killed anyone. They had stayed on the right side of that commandment their entire lives. And then Jesus stepped past murder altogether and put his finger on the soil where murder actually grows. anger that has hardened into contempt, the quiet decision made somewhere inside that another human being is worthless. Jesus was making the commandment more honest, reaching past the act to the thing that produces it. Because anyone who has ever truly hated another person knows exactly where that road leads if it is not stopped early. From there, he turned to adultery. You have heard that it was said, "You shall not commit adultery." But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Desire is part of being human. What Jesus targets here is something else. The look you choose to hold on to, the fantasy you keep feeding, the decision to keep going back to something you already know is breaking you from the inside. He was protecting his listeners, and he was protecting the people they might one day have harmed by letting that damage spread. Then he reached the hardest one. You have heard that it was said, "Eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth." But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. For 2,000 years, people have read this as a command to be a doormat, to absorb abuse without protest. But that misreads what Jesus was doing. In its first-century setting, a strike to the right cheek likely points to the backhand, the way a powerful man struck someone he treated as beneath him, a blow built to shame, not to fight. To turn the other cheek was to look the aggressor in the face and silently force him to choose. Either humiliate you the same way again, which this new angle no longer allows, or strike you the way one equal strikes another. Turning the other cheek was an act of quiet defiance, a refusal to play the game on the aggressor's terms. The same logic runs through the second mile, through giving the cloak as well as the shirt. Every one of these is a way of breaking the cycle of retaliation without becoming passive in front of it. Then he took that same refusal to strike back and pushed it to its furthest edge. You have heard that it was said, "Love your neighbor and hate your enemy." But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. In an occupied land, this command cut against everything they felt. The people listening walked past Roman soldiers every day. Some had buried family under Roman swords. To them, hating the enemy felt like loyalty, even like justice. And Jesus looked straight at that hatred and asked them to pray for the very people holding the spear. His reason ran deeper than kindness. Hatred slowly reshapes whoever carries it until the man fighting the oppressor begins to mirror him. Praying for an enemy is how you keep your own soul from hardening into the thing you despise. Finally, Jesus closed the sequence. Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. That line has unsettled readers for 2,000 years, mostly because they mishear one word. Perfect here does not merely mean the absence of flaws. It points to something deeper: maturity, completeness, whole in love. The verses just before this one explain what he meant. God sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. He loves the ones who curse him. That is the completeness Jesus is talking about. He was asking them to love the way their Father loves, completely and genuinely, poured out even on the ones who curse him. By this point in the sermon, you can imagine the crowd starting to feel the weight of what Jesus was building. He had reframed who they were before God and told them what they were for. He had shown them that the law had always reached past the hands to the heart. And now he turned a corner and led them somewhere even more uncomfortable. He led them into the secret places. Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. That is the sentence that governs everything in this part of the sermon. Because Jesus was about to do something his listeners did not expect, he left the practices themselves standing: giving, prayer, fasting were the three pillars of devotion in first-century Jewish life, and he affirmed all three. What he went after was subtler, something even the most devout people in the crowd had never been warned about. The danger of using spiritual practices to build a self, the danger of helping someone and then quietly waiting for them to notice, the danger of praying in a way that sounds holy in public but goes silent the moment the door closes, and the danger of fasting with a heavy face, hoping someone will wonder what you are giving up. When you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. He was describing someone who has simply stopped keeping score, someone whose generosity moves so naturally, so quietly, that they never go home at night and add it to a private list of all the good they have done. Then he turned to prayer and gave them something we have been praying ever since. Our Father in heaven. 2 words. And already the whole posture has shifted. He could have taught them to address God as a king or a judge. Instead, the word he places on their lips is Father. Family. You come the way a child comes home, already belonging, with nothing to prove. Hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. The prayer begins with God's name, God's kingdom, God's will, before a single one of our own needs. Surrender comes before supplication. The heart gets reoriented before the requests begin. Most of us pray the Lord's Prayer backwards. We start with what we need and try to remember God somewhere near the end. Jesus shows us the opposite movement. Give us today our daily bread. Just today. Enough for the day in front of you, with nothing held back for tomorrow. A daily dependence, chosen on purpose rather than admitted under protest. And then comes a line Jesus refused to leave alone. Forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. In the verses immediately after the prayer, Jesus stops everything and circles back to this one petition, alone, to make absolutely sure the crowd did not miss it, because unforgiveness reaches further than your relationships. It closes the very channel through which you receive what you most need. The hand that refuses to release someone else's debt cannot open to receive the mercy God is trying to pour into it. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. A reminder, as the prayer closes, that you live in a battle you cannot always see. You are not imagining it, and you are not fighting alone. Then Jesus turned to fasting and kept the same theme. Do not look the part. Do not wear your hunger on your face. Fasting, in Jesus' hands, is the practice of teaching the body that it is not in charge. It is the physical form of your will be done. The moment you say to your appetites, you do not get to decide today. And underneath all three practices, giving, praying, fasting, Jesus was making one quiet point. The spiritual practices he gives us are not performances meant to win human applause. They are hidden places where the heart returns to the Father who sees in secret. For most of the sermon's history, readers have treated what comes next as two separate teachings, the treasure passage, and then the worry passage. Two different problems, two different sermons inside the same chapter, but Jesus saw one problem behind both. In the second half of Matthew chapter 6, that becomes clear. He was diagnosing a single sickness and showing you both of its faces, accumulation and preoccupation, treasure and worry, the same fear wearing two different masks, the fear that God may not be enough, so I had better manage things myself. Jesus begins with the treasure. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Jesus had something more piercing in mind than the dangers of wealth. He was telling the crowd what their treasure was going to do to them. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Whatever you lean on to feel safe, that is where your heart slowly goes to live. Maybe this is you. Before your feet even touch the floor in the morning, money is already weighing on your mind. Before you have prayed, the bill that is due, the little that is left in the account, how to make it stretch to the end of the month. You are quietly afraid, and that fear has crept into your heart and taken hold of the first minutes of your day. Money does this when it sits in the wrong place, working silently, settling into your heart from the inside while you barely notice. Then he named the choice hiding underneath. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. And he was not exaggerating. A heart cannot belong to two masters at the same time. Sooner or later, one of them takes charge and starts telling you what everything means. The real question Jesus presses on the crowd and on you is which master is doing the talking. Which one tells you whether your day was a good one? Which one tells you whether your life is on track? Which one tells you whether you can sleep tonight? That is the master that truly owns your heart. Then Jesus turned to worry. Same diagnosis, a different symptom. Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Somewhere in that crowd stood a man with no idea where next week's food would come from, a widow counting what was left in the jar. When Jesus said, "Do not worry about what you will eat," he was looking straight at the people who had every reason to. He said it to their faces on a hillside while their stomachs were empty. He never says worry is silly or that the circumstances behind it are easy. He points at the birds of the air and the lilies of the field. Their lives are hardly easy, but no bird carries the particular torture human beings invent for ourselves, rehearsing futures that have not arrived, grieving losses we have not suffered, living whole days inside a tomorrow that may never come. The sparrow lives entirely inside the provision of the present moment, and that is the whole secret of its peace. Jesus is inviting his listeners into that same kind of trust, a confidence in a God who is already holding what they are afraid of losing. Then he points them in a completely different direction. But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. When the kingdom of God comes first in your life, everything else slowly finds its place, gradually, naturally, the way a plant grows toward the light. The treasure stops being the master, and the worry loses its grip. Because this is what Jesus had been driving at all along. The antidote to worry is not willpower. It is worship. The daily deliberate act of reorienting your whole life around a God who is already holding the very thing you are most afraid of losing. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. It is probably the most quoted line Jesus ever spoke, and one of the most misunderstood. In the modern world, it gets used as a kind of conversation ender, a way to silence any moral conviction someone else does not want to hear. As if Jesus had been wandering through Galilee preaching that nothing is right or wrong and nobody is allowed to notice anything about anyone. But he meant something sharper and more specific. Judging can mean two very different things, noticing what is wrong or condemning the person who did it. And everything around this verse shows which one Jesus had in mind. He was warning against the verdict, passing final sentence, appointing yourself as the final judge of another person's worth. He was telling them to get out of a chair that was never theirs to sit in. They could still recognize what was true. They simply had no right to hand down the verdict. Then he showed them how absurd they looked when they tried it anyway. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? We have all done it. We catch the sharp edge in someone else's tone and never hear it in our own. We can recite what they said 5 years ago, but somehow forget what we said yesterday. You can almost see it ripple through the crowd. The respectable man who came expecting Jesus to name the sinners around him, slowly realizing the teaching had turned back toward him. The one who had spent years tallying a neighbor's faults, feeling the weight of his own settle in. First take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Most people stop reading after "do not judge" and miss the second half entirely, the part where Jesus actually tells them to help in a very particular order. Your own plank first, then your brother's speck. The whole teaching turns on that one word. First, self-examination before correction, humility before clarity. The person who has wrestled with their own plank is the only one who can be trusted to handle someone else's speck. They will do it gently. The way you handle something you know is fragile. They remember exactly how it feels to have something pulled out of an eye. So they go slow. They keep their voice down. They just help, the way they were once helped. That is the posture Jesus is teaching, and it is the same posture that carries into everything he says next. The inner stance that shapes how you handle another person's failure is the same one that will shape how you handle their need. Mercy is a way of being, and it reaches in every direction at once. So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. It has been called the Golden Rule for so long that most people no longer hear what it actually says. There is a quieter version of this teaching that shows up in almost every culture, one that is sometimes called the Silver Rule. Do not do to others what you would not want done to yourself. It sounds almost identical. It is something else entirely. The Silver Rule asks only for restraint. Do no harm, stay out of the way. What Jesus gave was its opposite. Do, actively, move towards someone. Imagine what they need before they ask, and then go and meet it. The Silver Rule lets you sit on your hands as long as your hands are not hurting anyone. The Golden Rule does not let you sit at all. And then he finished the sentence. For this sums up the law and the prophets. This one sentence. Every command of the law about loving your neighbor, every warning, every plea, every call for justice and mercy spoken by the prophets, all of it compressed into a single posture. Treat people the way you would want them to treat you. The moral heart of the law and the prophets in one breath. That is what Jesus claims here, and once you have heard it, you cannot unhear it. But Jesus did not let the crowd sit in the warmth of that sentence for long, because he knew something about his listeners, and about every listener who would come after them. The moment people hear a beautiful teaching, the temptation is to admire it and walk away unchanged. So he immediately drew them a map. 2 gates, 2 roads, 2 destinations. Enter through the narrow gate. For wide is the gate, and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate, and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. Jesus leaves no room for a neutral path. He speaks of 2 roads with 2 different destinations, one leading to life, the other to destruction. The narrow gate points toward ultimate life with God, but it also describes the shape of discipleship here and now. The road leads to life precisely because it is the road Jesus has just described. The Beatitudes are narrow, so is enemy love, so is secret generosity, trust instead of worry, and pulling your own plank before you touch someone else's speck. Treating people the way you would want them to treat you, every single day, even when they have not earned it, is the narrowest road of all. Most people end up on the wide road simply because it is where everyone else already is. It asks nothing of you that you do not already feel like doing. It feels natural, it feels normal, and the narrow road, by its very nature, will always feel like swimming against the current. What does narrow look like in practice? It looks like being the first one to lower your voice in an argument, the first to send the message after days of silence, the first to stop punishing someone with distance. And sometimes it simply looks like giving without first making sure the other person had earned it. The narrow gate is not waiting for the strongest, or the smartest, or the most religious, or the most disciplined. It is waiting for the willing. The ones who heard everything Jesus said on that hillside and simply decided, yes, that is the life I want to build, whatever it costs, however few people walk it beside me. Everything in the sermon has been building toward this moment. The Beatitudes, salt and light, the heart behind the law, the hidden practices of giving, prayer and fasting, treasure and worry, the plank and the speck, the golden rule, the narrow gate. All along, Jesus has been laying something down. And now, at the very end, he stops teaching and tells a story. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. He paints it slowly. 2 men, 2 houses, 2 foundations. From the outside, while the sun is shining, the 2 houses probably look identical. Same walls, same roof, same windows. If you walked past them on a bright afternoon, you would not be able to tell them apart. And that is exactly the point. The difference is invisible. The difference is underneath. Then Jesus points to the one thing that set them apart. Both men heard the same words. The same words. The wise man and the foolish man, side by side, with the same access, the same intelligence, the same chance to shout Amen on the hillside that day. They heard exactly the same sermon. The wise man heard it and built. The foolish man heard it and admired. That is the whole gap, and it is the gap most of us live in for most of our lives. What does it mean to build on the rock? Jesus answers in the same breath. Hearing these words of mine and putting them into practice, not studying them or posting them, doing them. Every ordinary day, until they have quietly reshaped the life you actually live. It means the Beatitudes actually lived, enemy love actually practiced, secret generosity actually given away. The Lord's Prayer prayed honestly, all the way through, with the forgiveness line actually meant, the plank pulled from your own eye before you reach for anyone else's speck. The kingdom sought first thing in the morning, the way he said. Then there is the other foundation. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. And the foundation Jesus gives the foolish man is the most ordinary thing in the world. Sand. It looks perfectly solid in the right light. It is convenient. It asks for no digging at all. You can throw up a beautiful house on sand in half the time and a fraction of the effort, which is exactly why people build on it. The most dangerous foundations are the ones that look reliable, until the day they do not. What does sand look like today for someone watching this? Building your life on achievement and realizing one day that even after the promotion, the house, the respect, you still feel a step behind. Building on approval and watching your peace rise and fall with one message, one comment, one silence. Building on comfort and discovering how fragile your faith feels the moment life stops being easy. Or simply building on the assumption that the storm will never come at all. The storm. Jesus does not describe it in detail. He does not need to. He leaves it almost generic on purpose. The rain came down, The streams rose, the winds blew. Whatever your storm is, you can place it inside that sentence. Illness, betrayal, grief, failure, the collapse of something you built your identity around. The night the phone call came that changed everything. Think back to your own last real storm. What held? What gave way the moment the wind hit it? At the very end of the parable, Jesus brings the listener back to where he started, the same hillside where a carpenter sat down to teach. But now, after everything he has said, you finally understand what he was doing from the very first word. He was not delivering a moral code. He was laying a foundation. Every word from "Blessed are the poor in spirit" all the way to "The wise man built on rock" was a stone. He was handing them out one by one to anyone willing to take them and build. A storm may feel as though it is only about your circumstances, but every trial in this life reveals what your life is truly resting on. And beyond every storm we face now, Jesus' warning reaches toward the final moment when every life and every foundation will stand exposed before God. By the time the rain falls, it is too late to dig. When Jesus finished speaking, the crowd just sat there. Matthew tells us they were amazed at his teaching because he taught as one who had authority, unlike their teachers of the law. Then, slowly, they got up and walked back down the hill. They had climbed that hill with 3 voices ringing in their ears. By the time the carpenter stopped speaking, every one of those voices had been answered. To the Pharisee, who measured holiness in public inches, he had shown a righteousness that lives in the parts of you no one ever sees. To the zealot, sharpening a blade for the enemy, he had handed the harder weapon of loving that enemy and praying for him. And to Rome, with its old gospel that the strong eat and the weak serve, he had promised the earth to the meek. 3 voices that had owned that hillside for generations. And in a single afternoon, a carpenter sitting in the dirt had taken all 3 apart. And every one of them carried the same words down that mountainside, the same Beatitudes, the same call to be salt and light, the same Lord's Prayer, the same 2 builders, the same coming storm. Some of them changed. Many of them did not. The sermon had been identical for all of them. What set them apart was simple. It came down to what each person did with those words once they got home. And that is what makes it so unsettling. That hillside keeps coming back. Every time someone honestly encounters what Jesus said up there, the scene reassembles around them. The crowd, the carpenter sitting down to teach, and the listener has to decide whether they will carry these words back to their life as something they admired or as something they intend to live. You have just listened to the Sermon on the Mount, unfolded the way the first crowd heard it. Now the only question left is the one Jesus left the crowd with. What are you going to build with today? Not the rest of your life. Not someday. Today. Maybe it is a conversation you have been avoiding, the one where enemy love stops being a concept and starts being a phone call. Maybe it is a prayer you have been reciting for years, prayed honestly for the first time, all the way through, with the forgiveness line said and meant. Maybe it is a moment of generosity no one will ever know about, given so quietly that even your own left hand barely notices. Maybe it is a worry, named out loud and surrendered, instead of rehearsed in your head one more time tonight. Small stones. The kind of stones a life is actually built from, because the storm is coming. Every life eventually meets weather it did not choose. And when it does, the only thing that will matter is what your house was standing on. The small surrenders, the unseen generosities, the prayers prayed without an audience, the forgiveness given before it was deserved. Close your eyes for just a moment and put yourself back on that hill. The dust, the crowd around you, the carpenter sitting in front of you, looking at you the way he looked at them. And imagine that everything he just said, he said for you. Because he did. Build, friend. While there is still light, while the sky is still clear, while the choice is still in your hands, build.